So good day to everyone. I'm going to discuss about the overview of financial markets. So by allocating money and providing liquidity for enterprises and entrepreneurs, financial markets play a critical role in promoting the smooth functioning of capitalist economies. The stock markets make it simple for buyers and sellers to exchange their assets. So if they are exchanging their assets, between the buyers and sellers, if the financial markets produce securities offerings that offer a return to those with surplus funds, they are called investors or lenders, while still making these funds accessible to those that need additional funds. They are called borrowers. So financial markets arrange global network of investors and investments firms that may be lenders, creditors, or shareholders in publicly traded stocks all over the world. Financial markets include any marketplace where shares are traded, such as equity exchange, bond market, forex market, and derivative market. Financial markets are essential for capitalist societies to function properly. And also, any marketplace where stocks are traded is referred to as a financial market. There are several different types of financial markets, such as forex, capital, stock, and bond markets, to name a few. Properties or shares that are listed on controlled exchanges or traded over over the counter can be included in these markets. So in acronym, they are called OTC um, financial markets. And also, financial markets are essential to the smooth running of democratic system since they deal in all kinds of securities. What if the stock markets failed or crash? To what will going to be happen in the economy? So when the stock markets crash or failed, the economy will be disrupted, resulting in stagnation and unemployment. So it means that financial markets is functioning a vital role in our economy. Without financial markets, it will result in stagnation or unemployment. So individual investors and firms may use stock markets to swap currency, invest in businesses, and organize loans. So next, and also the stock market is just one type of the financial market. Financial markets are made by buying and selling numerous types of financial instruments, including equities, bonds, currencies, and derivatives. Financial markets rely heavily on informational transparency to ensure that the market set prices that are efficient and appropriate. The market prices of securities may not be indicative of their intrinsic value because of microeconomic forces like taxes. Um, State, national government, and municipal governments are also participants in the capital markets since they are mainly creditors of funds for public purposes. Public financial markets are the name given to their markets. And money travels across the globe from investors. Wait, saan na yan? So when a corporation uses the financial markets to raise new funds, the sale of securities is said to be made in the primary market by way of a new issue, and also securities exchange in the secondary market by buyers until they are marketed to the general public or institutions and individuals. We all know that prices fluctuate constantly in the secondary market as buyers buy and sell shares depending on their perceptions of a company's prospects. Financial administrators get input on the success of their companies. Companies who do well and receive high-priced shares from the market have an easier time raising fresh funding in the money and stock markets than their rivals or competitors. They may even collect funds at a cheaper price. And ay wala. The fundamental role or function of financial markets, um, such as or equity markets and financial intermediaries, such as banks, insurance premium, insurance firms, and others, is to bring citizens together by transferring funds from those that have a surplus to others who have a deficit. So, if a person or individuals or companies have a surplus, they're going to invest those extra funds, while other companies or other individuals will get those funds as a loan that will be used for the expansion of their business and for other purposes. So capital markets operate for a variety of purposes, but the most basic one is to facilitate effective distribution of resources and assets in financial system. Financial markets help the world economy operate more efficiently by providing a free market for the movement of resources, financial commitments, and wealth. They often enable investors to share in capital returns over time. So this is the diagram of, of indirect finance and direct finance. So financial intermediation is a well-known and well-understood mechanism that most of us are aware of. Financial intermediation occurs as a main investor moves funds to a primary borrower. The primary borrower. Uh, However, there are two requirements that must be met in order for this procedure to work or process to work. The borrower's shares become indirect securities, and the lender's assets become an explicit fund during financial intermediation. So, financial intermediaries are regarded as the cornerstone of indirect financing fundamental framework. The individual borrowing the money obtains financial assistance from them in the form of a loan from the financial market. So, as you can see on this diagram, the lender or savers, such as households, business firms, government, and foreigners, will save money to financial markets, and the financial markets will provide those funds to the borrower or spenders. Okay, um, this is what you call the direct finance because um, because as you can see here, the diba? As you can see here, the uh, the intermediaries here is the financial market. So the borrowers spenders directly obtain funds from the lender or savers, diba, without going to the financial intermediaries such as um, banks, diba, financial institutions. That's why it's called direct finance. Compared to the indirect finance, the funds that was obtained to lender or savers, diba, it will be uh, go through the financial intermediaries or financial institution banks, and those funds uh, will serve as a loan or a fund for borrower or spenders. But usually for business firms, they use it as to expand their business. Diba? Sa government, they will use it uh, in their public infrastructure and household. And foreigners, they will use that fund in some purpose on their personal um, wants, diba? And also, indirect finance represents a process where borrowers borrow funds indirectly from the financial market, such as banks, rather than directly from investors. So, as what I said earlier, the funds that came from the lender, di ba, will go through the to financial intermediary. Then financial intermediaries such as financial institution banks will provide those funds as a loan to borrower or spenders. So, for instance, a small business entity doesn't approach any investor directly. Instead, the well known source of borrowing money is a loan from a bank. Bank provides a loan to the business and charges a particular amount as interest. Bank uses this interest to pay its own interest amount to the investors and common depositors. So that is the process of indirect finance, di ba? Because there is a financial intermediary which is the bank, di ba? Then what exactly does the term financing imply? Financing is the process of placing your capital into a fund for corporate companies, investing in another company, or merely putting your money into essential business transactions. So whether direct and indirect, these finances are two forms of financing which is available in the market. So what are those examples? So, equity lending, securities purchases, and collateral agreements of bonds and stocks are all traditional funding practices. There are a few examples of direct lending techniques. So, the direct lending techniques, yun na nga, yung equity lending on which, or security purchases on which the borrower spender, or I mean the investor will directly go to this uh, financial institution to invest their funds, diba? And of course, to have a passive income. Okay? An enterprise is not required to pay any interest rate by using direct funding. Generally, the lender lenders his money directly to the investors by traders, retailers, or even investment banks in these methods. Diba? So, if the lender or savers decided to give or invest in a particular financial institution, diba, such as yung to invest in a business or company, diba, the lender or saver uh, will invest and they will earn a passive income for that particular fund, diba? Compared to indirect finance, diba? The lender saver will give funds to financial intermediaries, and the financial intermediaries will use those funds as a loan to the borrower spenders. Then the borrower or spenders will pay the specific interest because of owing of particular funds. Then, the financial intermediaries, diba, usually will give uh, small amount of interest because their lender or sellers give funds to them. So when you want indirect funding, the most relevant principle is indirect financing by financial intermediaries. These intermediaries are responsible for buying direct liens from the borrower based on a series of criteria. Then they translate these direct statements using a particular collection of criteria in order to present them to the lender for sale. This is the most popular form of indirect funding used for companies. The number of financial instruments used in these two forms of finance is the major distinction. Both the creditor and investor, there's just one financial instrument of direct funding. In the presence of intermediaries, though indirect finance is divided into two types of instruments. The first is the relationship between lenders and intermediaries, and the second is the relationship between intermediaries and borrowers. Diba? So based from the diagram, those who have savings and are lending funds, the lender or savers, are at the left, and those who must borrow funds to finance their spending, the borrowers spenders, are at the right. The principal lender savers are households, but business enterprises and the government as well as foreigners and their government sometimes also find themselves with excess funds and so lend them out. The most important borrowers spenders are businesses and the government, particularly material government, but households and foreigners also borrow to finance their purchases of cars, furnitures, and houses. The arrows show that the funds flow from lender savers to borrower spenders both directly and indirectly. Funds flow from lenders to borrowers indirectly through financial intermediaries such as banks or directly through financial markets such as Philippine Stock Exchange. So, what do financial markets do? So, despite the fact that they span a wide range of asset classes and have a variety of mechanisms and rules, all capital markets function by putting buyers and sellers of a particular commodity or contract together and enabling them to exchange with one another. This is frequently accomplished by the use of an auction or a price discovery process. So, the financial markets uh, serve to raise capital. So in raising capital, funds for businesses to build buildings, upgrade equipment, or improve in other aspects. Individuals who choose to buy a house or a vehicle or also make a credit card payments may use this source of cash. Next, commercial transactions. In commercial transactions, it involves aspects like negotiating reimbursement for a merchandise selling in another country and having operating cash such that a company can compensate its workers if consumers' payments are late. Next, price setting. Markets allow price discovery, which is the process of determining the relative values of various goods depending on the rates at which people are willing to purchase and sell them. And of course, the financial market is used to have an asset valuation. The only way to assess the worth of a company or its properties or inventory is to use market values. Diba? Then, last is arbitrage, or commodities and currencies can trade at very different prices in different locations in countries with underdeveloped financial markets. Prices shifts Prices shift towards a uniform level as traders in stock markets seek to benefit from these divergences, rendering the whole economy more competitive. So next, investing. The debt, bond, and money markets provide a way to make a return on funds that aren't required right now, as well as to build reserves that can generate profits in the future. Next, risk management. Future stocks and other financial contracts may be used to hedge a variety of risks. They often encourage markets to price danger, encouraging businesses and individuals to exchange risk to reduce the exposure to others while maintaining exposure to others. So here in the risk management, usually if the company will purchase goods outside the country, diba, in order to lessen the risk because the 'di ba yung palitan ng peso sa dolyar, 'di ba, nagfa-fluctuate yan. There is no fixed rate regarding that um regarding that. So as a result, if the company will purchase outside the country yung goods nila na kailangan for as their materials in producing their product, ginagawa nila, nakikipag-usap sila sa bangko or financial institution na magkakaroon na ng fixed rate, 'di ba? Whatever happens sa yung exchange rate, kung tumaas ba o bumaba, 'di ba? So yung risk na yun, ibibigay nila, I mean, makikipag-coordinate sila, makikipag-transact sila sa bangko na magkakaroon na ng fixed rate na kapag dumating yung goods na yun sa kanila, ang amount na ipambabayad do'n is kung ano yung napagkasunduan nila sa bangko, 'di ba? So yung risk na yun, yung risk na baka mataas yung exchange rate, 'di ba, ay na-mitigate na kasi yung risk ay naibigay na sa bangko. Kasi fixed na yung rate na ibabayad ni bangko patungkol dun sa goods na matatanggap yung company. Okay, regardless kung magkano yung exchange rate on the day the goods are received by the company. Oo. So kung mas mababa yung exchange rate, 'di ba, or mataas, o magkakaroon ng loss or gain sa part ni bangko o kaya sa part ni buyer. So just regarding this derivatives yan, more on as ano yan, madi-discuss sa advanced accounting. So mas ma-appreciate niyo yan sa advanced accounting. So next. Hmm. So here, there are many different financial markets in a developed country. So the stock market, bond market, forex, commodities, and real estate market are only a few examples of financial markets and their functions. So the stock markets, money markets versus the primary versus secondary markets, and listed versus over-the-counter markets are all samples of financial markets. In a developing economy, there are several capital markets. As a result, The following are the basic characteristics of these markets. Una is yung debt and equity markets and the stock exchange. So, the funds in the financial market can be obtained by a firm or individual in two ways. First is a debt instrument. So, debt instrument is some kind of instrument that is primarily categorized as debt. So, debt securities are financial instruments that may be used by individuals, governments, and businesses to obtain funds. So, debt securities provide money to a company who agrees to pay it back over time. Debt instruments include credit cards, credit lines, deposits, and shares. So, debt capital provided by the private institutions is typically referred to as a debt instrument. So, governments as well as corporate private corporations are examples of institutional bodies. The GAAP, diba, the Financial Accounting Standards Boards, generally accepted accounting principles, which is the GAAP, and the and the International Accounting Standards Boards, International Financial Reporting Standards (IFRS), could have specific provisions for the reporting of various categories of debt instruments on an entity's financial records for financial company accounting purposes. So, the nature of the debt instrument, diba, is primarily categorized as debt. So, diba, the category of debt instrument has a significant impact on the issuance markets for institutionalized institutions. The credit cards and credit lines are two types of debt instruments that a business may utilize to raise funds. These revolving loan lines usually have straightforward structure with just one investor. They're often not usually affiliated with a securitization, main or secondary sector. Advanced contract structuring and the participation of various vendors or buyers usually is a structured marketplace will be required for more complicated debt instruments. And also the debt instrument, example of this instrument is a bond or mortgage. Diba? There is a binding arrangement between the creditor and the holder of the instrument to reimburse the holder of the instrument certain peso sums at regular intervals before a given date, where the final payment is rendered. If the maturity date is shorter than a year, it is considered short term. If the maturity period is 10 years or more, it is considered long term. Then, if maturity is between 1 and 10 years, it is intermediate term. So, one of the best example of debt instrument, di ba? Ito na nga, yung bond or mortgage. Tama? In your financial accounting, di ba? You already learn how to compute a debt instrument and how to account the debt instrument in the financial statements of a company. But here in a financial market, so more on ano lang tayo, definition and how the debt instrument uh, functions in the financial market. So, usually, kapag the best example for this, if the company wa- wants to have equipment and that equipment is worth 10 million, diba? And the company cannot buy it on cash. So, the company will issue a debt instrument, diba? In order for them to acquire property or an equipment. that will be used on their business. So yung usual transaction about that instrument. So the company, 'di ba, ginamit yung pondo, 'di ba, to acquire properties or equipments. So pasok yan sa investing activities ng company na nag-acquire nung equipment na yun. So next instrument is equity instrument. These are securities that fall into the category of equity-based financial products. So here, from the other instrument, which is debt instrument, if the debt instrument is debt, here the equity instrument is a equity-based financial products. So all of kinds of stocks, diba, common, preferred, diba, ordinary, yun yung mga equity-based financial products. Stock options and equity futures are example of exchange-traded instruments in this group. Stock options and exotic and derivatives are examples of over-the-counter derivatives. And also, as what I said earlier, the equity instrument example of equity instrument are common or ordinary shares, diba? Which are rights of a proportion of the company's net profits and properties. Since they have no maturity date, they are considered long-term shares. So if an individual or company, diba, decided to buy common ordinary shares in a corporation, diba, that company or that individual will have the right of a portion of the company's net profits and properties. Yung net profits yung tinutukoy is yung dividends. Samantalang yung sa mga properties, if the corporation will decided to liquidate, yan, may share pa din yung individual, yung mga shareholders doon sa mga properties na yun based on their number of shares sa company. The primary drawback to holding equities rather than debt in a company is that an asset investor is a residual claimant. Debt holders are paid first, followed by stockholders. Meanwhile, being a stock investor has the privilege of personally benefiting from improvements in the company's performance. So the difference between the debt holders and stockholders, the debt holders regarding the liquidation, the company's or corporation's liquidation, the debt holders will be prioritized to be paid first, followed by the stockholders. However, regarding the income of the company, the stockholders or shareholders, diba, will be prevailed or they have the privilege of benefiting from the company's performance or the company's profit, diba, through dividends. So, for debt and equity instruments, the financial market serves as both a primary and secondary market. So let us differentiate the primary and secondary market. The primary market is where governments and companies sell their shares for the first time. So usually it acquires or it happens in the initial public offering, diba? So public officers and private placements are the two forms of main sector deals that corporation um, partake in. So in the primary market, diba, if the company or the government will issue shares in a primary market, it means that that is the first time that the share will be sold to the shareholders or to the buyer. So usually it happens yung natin sa IPO, initial public offering. Then after selling it in the IPO, the other transaction will be called as secondary market. Uh, Here in the secondary market, so securities are produced in the primary market. Firms offer float fresh stocks and bonds to the public for the first time in this industry. A primary demand is exemplified by an initial public offering or IPO. Investors may purchase shares from the bank that perform the original underwriting on a specific stock in these transactions. When a private corporation issues stock to the market for the first time, it is known as initial public offering. So as long as the stocks and bonds are being sold in the in a initial public offering, diba? It is considered sold in a primary market, no? From the term itself, diba, initial public offering. So that is the first time that those bonds and stocks will be sold to the buyer. Okay? And also, primary markets are when investors are able to purchase securities directly from the issuer. So, like for example, company A, this is the first time that the company will issue shares to the buyers. So, the buyers or investors will directly purchase to the company. So, this is called primary markets. In the primary market, companies sell new stocks and bonds to the public for the first time, such as with an initial public offering, often at a predetermined or negotiated price. So, usually if the companies will sell new stocks and bonds to the public, it must be based on initial public offering. Sometimes, the rate of the stocks and bonds, 'di ba, hindi yan naka-base sa market value ng stocks and bonds. Hindi. Usually dahil nga ano siya, first time na ibebenta, so usually nasa ano yan, nakadepende sa napagkasunduan nung issuer at yung investor. Then, stock exchanges instead represent secondary markets where investors buy and sell from one another. So after the initial public offering, the succeeding transaction in selling those shares and bonds will be called as secondary market na po yun. So, the best example of secondary market are in the stock exchange are in the Philippine Stock Exchange. So, where investors buy and sell from one another. So, in the primary market, the one who are selling the stocks and bonds are the issuer or the company. Compared to the secondary markets, the seller will be the investors who bought the stocks and bonds to the issuer. Then then the investor may sold it anytime to other investors, okay, or to other corporation. And also, secondary market is also classified as a stock exchange or stock market. Securities may be exchanged in the secondary market after they have been issued to the general public. Brokers are investments brokers that link buyers and sellers. Through purchasing and selling shares, dealers link buyers and sellers. So, after the primary market, diba, secondary markets na yung susunod. So usually the usual transaction if you want to buy shares, usually you will go to a um, dealer or broker para makapag-acquire ka ng shares. Okay, so kung yun ang gagawin mo, so nasa ano ka na, secondary market. Okay? But if you are an investor and you want to purchase directly from the issuer, yan, ano yan, and those stocks and bonds are new and for the first time it will be offered to the public. Yan, ang tawag na dun ay primary market. So secondary market is where investors buy and sell securities they already own. It is what most people typically think of as the stock market, though stocks are also sold on the primary market when they are first issued. Okay. So it is important to understand the difference or distinction between the secondary market and the primary market. So when a company issues stock or bonds for the first time and sells those securities directly to investors, that transaction occurs on the primary market. Some of the most common and well-publicized primary market transactions are IPOs or initial public offerings. During an IPO, a primary market transaction occurs between the purchasing investor and the investment bank underwriting the IPO. Any proceeds from the sale of shares of stock on the primary market go to the company that issued the stock after accounting for the bank's administrative fees. So the proceeds in selling those new stocks that is offered to IPO, diba, um, will directly benefit the company. Diba? After deducting some fees or charges because of the sale, yung proceeds na yun sa company na yun. Kung saan the company will use it in order to expand their business, diba? Or they will use it as a capital in venturing kind of business, gagamitin nila yun. If these initial investors later decide to sell their stake or in the company, they can do so on the secondary market. Okay, so if the initial investors acquire the new bonds or shares, diba, they can sell it anytime on the secondary market. So whatever the gains on the sale in selling the um, shares between the investors or buyers or sellers, diba, the proceeds will go to the investor, not to the company that issued the stock or to the underwriting bank. Okay, so that is the difference regarding sa proceeds after selling those shares or bonds. In the primary market, it will be directly acquired by the corporation or the company. Compared to secondary market, the company who issued that share will have no will never be benefited, diba? If the investor will sell it in the secondary market. Okay? So, kung mag-benefit lang doon, yung investor, kasi binenta niya sa secondary market. Okay? So, it is simpler. So, there are two important functions of secondary market. First, it is simpler to offer financial securities in order to collect funds. So, um, diba? So, that is the reason why some of the investors are selling their shares to other investor or to other buyer because they want to raise funds or cash. Okay, next, determine the price at which the issuing company offers the protection in the primary um, market. So in the secondary market, usually the shares are being sold at fair market value. So usually the fair market value or the selling price of that shares will always be um, exceeds the cost of those shares. So the investor will earn a profit. Okay. So next, there are two broad segments of the stock markets. The organized stock exchange. So here, the organized stock exchange, there is a physical location or the uh, the stock exchange has office. But the best sample of organized stock exchange is the Philippine Stock Exchange. And also, uh, these are physical entities that serve as secondary markets for the resale of existing securities. So here in the organized stock exchange, the, the trade, ito, all of the shares diba, are being sold here, especially if it is listed in the Philippine Stock Exchange. Okay. Next, it determines the price at which issuing company offers the protect. Sorry. Um, how about the over-the-counter exchange? So here, this OTC market is a decentralized market in which market participants trade stocks, commodities, currencies, or other instruments directly between two parties and without a central exchange or broker. So, over-the-counter markets do not have physical locations. Instead, trading is conducted electronically. So, here in the over-the-counter exchange, diba, you can easily buy or sell shares uh, in any digital or online platform. Diba? Compared to organized stock exchange, um, it is required for you to be on their office, diba, if you're going to transact or buy shares. And also, in an OTC market, dealers act as a market makers by quoting prices at which they will buy and sell a security, currency, or other financial products. So here, if you're in the over-the-counter market, the dealers who will is the one who will quote a price, regardless whether it is the fair market value of that shares. Diba? More or less, the dealer will always offer the price of those shares on a higher price, okay, compared to organized stock exchange. They usually sold the shares in the fair market value, but here in the OTC, the discretion of the in quoting prices of those shares is in the discretion of the dealers. Then a trade can be executed between two participants in an OTC market without others being aware of the price at which the transaction was completed. So here in the OTC market, the dealers will not disclose any information, di ba? Most especially the cost of the shares. Usually, ang disclose lang nila is yung selling price. They are not required anymore to um, give you the information on how much the shares was acquired by the dealer. And in general, OTC markets are typically less transparent than exchanges and also subject to fewer regulations. So, in the over-the-counter markets, uh, compared to organized stock exchange, diba? It is so hard for the regulatory bodies to monitor all of the transaction in the over the counter compared to organized stock exchange na kailangan talaga i-monitor na government natin or regulatory bodies. But here in the OTC markets, medyo mahirap sa part na nila para i-monitor pa to. So, as a result, it is subject to fewer regulations. Because of this, liquidity in the OTC market may come at a premium. And also, uh, in the over-the-counter markets, where traders deal directly between two parties rather than via a central exchange or some third entity. So here in the over-the-counter, um, both investors will directly transact on each other compared to the stock against stock exchange. Usually there is an intermediary or there is a central exchange or third party, diba, that will serve as a middleman between those investors. Diba? Compare here, wala na, diretsong transaction na. Okay? Next, there are no physical positions or market makers in OTC industries. Bonds, options, structured goods, and currencies are among the most widely exchanged over-the-counter products. Okay. So, stock exchange. A stock exchange is a controlled secondary market for the buying and selling of assets such as stocks and bonds. The aim of stock exchange is to make it easier for buyers and sellers to trade shares by having a virtual or physical marketplace. The forum on which to purchase the sale of stock of some public traded firms is referred to as listing agreement. So in the listing agreement, usually ano yan, yun nga, if the shares is traded publicly or it is listed in the Philippine Stock Exchange, there must be a required or some requirements must be complied. One of those is the transaction must have a listing agreement. Next, the stock market is regarded as a barometer of a company's economic stability. Okay, next. So let us define listing. So admission of shares to transactions on a registered stock market of every incorporated entity and so on is referred to as listing. So what is the primary goal of listing? Its primary goal is to provide listed stocks with liquidity and marketability, as well as to ensure efficient tracking and exchange for the good of all market participants. So, in listing, di ba, are those, ano siya, yung mga information about the shares, di ba, sa listing, naka-included na yun. The liquidity, the marketability, di ba? And of course, kung yung tracking mong shares, I mean kung kayo ba nagsimula, so sinong company nagbenta ng shares na yon, then sino nag-acquire, yung mga investors na nag-acquire, yan, nakalagay dun sa listing na yon. And the SEC has recognized the stock exchange. So the government regulatory body that is monitoring the Philippine Stock Exchange is the Securities and Exchange Commission. Then, and also, official quotation is the amount at which shares are purchased and sold by the government. Okay, next. So securities of an entity may be listed at any of the following stages. So, first is at the time of public issue of shares or debentures. So the usual transaction, the company will issue or the corporation will issue shares to investors. Yan yun. Next, at time of rights issue of shares or debentures. So here, the corporation is providing the right of redemption on on a particular shares of the investors. So if the investors uh, has the right regarding the shares, or I mean yung corporation may right do sa shares na yon, di ba? It can be sold sa Philippine Stock Exchange. Next, at time of bonus issue of shares. Okay, next and last is shares issued on merger. So, dun sa shares, 'di ba sa merger, usually if a company will merge or consolidate, 'di ba? Usually kapag mas pa siya sa merger, kapag yung dalawang company magme-merge, 'di ba? Yung isa lang yung company ang matitira. Tama? So, if the company, ano yan, usually yung company in order to acquire another company, di ba, mag-i-issue yan ng shares bilang pambayad para ma-acquire yung company na yun. So, kung yun yung transaction na yun, pwede yung consider as listed. Okay, next. So, the Philippine Stock Exchange. So, the recognized organized stock exchange in the Philippines. Yan. Yan yung Philippine Stock Exchange. So, sa Tagalog, it is known as Pamilihang Salapi ng Pilipinas. Ako pa rin Tagalog. PSE. Okay. Pamilihang Salapi ng Pilipinas. Hindi yan yung Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas. Iba pa naman. Okay, it is a national trading market in the Philippines. It was created on 1992 by merging Manila and Makati Stock Exchange. So, on June 1998, the Securities Exchange Commission granted the PSE a self-regulating organization status, meaning that the entity has the ability to implement its own rules and regulations, similar to a corporation's bylaws. So, the PSE, di ba, has a legal name or it considered as a legal entity, diba? Just like other corporations. Uh, so, si SEC ang nagbigay o nag-grant kay PSE, diba, na maging katulad din ng ibang corporation. Okay? But the term used by the PSE is a self-regulating organization. Next, in 2001, the PSE was converted from a non-profit, non-stock organization into a shareholder-based revenue-earning corporation and listed its own shares under the ticker symbol PSE. Okay. So, yung PSE compared to other corporation, yung PSE is a non-profit, non-stock organization and into a shareholder-based revenue-earning corporation and listed its own shares under the ticker symbol PSE. So, if I'm not mistaken, so si PSE lang yung non-profit non-stock organization na may listed shares sa listed shares. So, although kahit non-profit siya sa non-stock, nakapag-listed pa rin siya ng sarili niyang shares under the ticker symbol PSE. Okay. There are 323 registered companies in the exchange as of September 2019. So, over-the-counter market. So, I already discussed kanina yan. Over the counter market, usually ang nagtatransact na dyan is yung iba-ibang investors, buyers and sellers. Diba? Without going through to financial intermediaries, diba? Or any third-party entity. Directly buying and selling of every investors. Yan yung over-the-counter market. Usually, they are sold in any platform, whether online, offline. Yan. Anyone can buy shares on this market. Next, day trading. So in day trading, uh, day trading is where a stockholder buys and sells the same commodities on the same day, taking advantage of minor market volatility. So certain dealers only keep stocks for a few minutes before trading them again for a much better profit. Day traders typically choose more liquid shares since they are easier to sell. So we all know that it's in shares. If you want to uh, accumulate wealth, diba? It must be a long-term commitment. However, dito sa day trading, ano siya, short-term lang. So usually, one day transaction lang. Halimbawa, sa umaga, binili niya. Then, a few minutes, biglang tumaas yung value ng shares na yun, binenta niya kagad. So, the traders will earn a profit. No, hindi nila na hinintay na mag-accumulate pa ng wealth na usually 5 to 10 years for them, di ba? Para makapag-accumulate ng wealth. However, here in the day trading, benta ka agad, kunting taas lang ng ng value ng shares, automatic binibenta na kaagad. Usually, they call them players. Yun yung alam ko yung term nila. Kasi when I was in college, yun yung term nila. I don't know if this tama ba yung term na yun, pero ang tama is day trader. Next, what are the skills that the day trader should have? Diba? Una, good market data analysis. So day trading involves good analysis of economic events. With good analyzing expertise, you can quickly decide when to sell and when not to sell stocks, as well as which business you can purchase from. So the day trader must know how to analyze the market. Diba? He is up to date on all economic events because those economic events may have a big impact on the value of the shares that he or she will purchase. Okay? And also, makaka-apekto rin yun kung gusto niya na ibenta yung mga shares na yun o hindi. Okay? At the same time, if the trader, diba, analyze the he or she um, will, ano to? The transaction or the if he decided to sell his or her shares, diba? And nakita niya na-analyze niya na malulugi siya. Ang gagawin ni day traders, um, he or she will not go through that transaction or ibebenta niya yung shares niya kasi nga malulugi siya. Kung bumaba man yung value ng shares na yun, nagkaroon lang siya ng paper loss. Pero hindi siya considered as loss talaga kasi nga hindi naman niya binenta. So the day traders will wait for the right time. Diba? Kung kailan yung tamang panahon na may mataas yung value yung shares, doon niya ibebenta. Pero hindi niya papatagalin yun. Kasi nga, ano naman siya, day traders lang. Oo. Ang goal niya is to earn income on a short period of time. Okay? Compared dun sa investor na gusto mag-accumulate ng wealth, usually gusto nila yung ano yan, long term dapat. Okay, next, scalping, where sellers keep their stocks for a brief period of time in order to profit from a slight rise in margin. So, when traders hold their shares for a short time, benefiting from a very small margin increase. Yun yung scalping. So, sabihin, konting taas lang nung shares, automatic binibenta na nila yan kasi they are after on the short-term income that they will get. Okay, next, margin trading, where an investor borrows an amount or a portion of the price of stock from securities, companies, and exchange for agreeing to offer the broker profits. So here, si day trader, usually, binibigay niya yan or usually, dito sa margin trading, um, in order for the day traders can easily sold their shares, yan, pumapasok sila dun sa mga brokerage firm na kung saan yung brokerage firm sa bawat benta ng day traders na yun, may certain share dun sa income ni day traders. Okay? Next, bid offer spread, which is the disparity between the price at which a stock was purchased and the price at which it was offered. The greater the difference, the greater the benefits, as long as the gap remains favorable. So here sa bid over spread, usually ang maganda example nito is diba, sa balita ang palitan ng dolyar, $1 is to 48 pesos, tapos nagpapalit ka sa M. Tapos ang palitan doon is 46, 'di ba? So yung difference na 2 pesos, yan yung bid over spread. Yan yung gain nung ni M. Villiers, 'di ba? Patungkol dun sa pag pag-exchange mo nung pera ng dolyar sa peso. Ayun yung bid over the difference. Kasi ang fair market value, ang value nung the value ng exchange rate, 'di ba, is 48, pero sa um, pag pinapalitan mo, 'di ba, ang palitan is 46. Kaya huwag kayong magtataka na kapag binalita sa TV na mas mataas yung exchange rate tapos nagpapalit ka, 'di ba, sa mga remittance center, usually mababa yan. Kasi yun yung bid offer, yun yung income nila patungkol dun sa transaction na yun. Okay? Next, day trading is a high-risk way of trading. O tama. It is a high-risk way of trading. Why? Because since the market is too volatile, day trading is a high-risk approach. Nevertheless, high risk comes with high rewards. So, yun nga, di ba? The higher the risk, the higher the return. Directly, sila related? Diba? Yung risk and return. So, although the day trading is an high risk approach in terms of selling and buying shares, and very unpredictable, marami pa rin ang nag-engganyo kasi mabilis ang kita yung nagbe-benefit sa mga day traders. Okay, next, day trading is expensive. Day traders need big resources, so they benefit from investing large amounts of money and then selling them over a short period of time. Even though the gain is just 1 penny or 1 peso, it may be very profitable for the investor because they own more securities of the business that just benefited. So here, um, ano siya, expensive daw. Bakit? Kasi dahil nga maliit yung kita, kung gusto ni day trader na may malaki siyang kita, dapat mas marami siyang shares. So, pag maraming shares na nabenta niya, mas marami nag-accumulate yung uh, profit na na-earn niya because of that transaction. Okay? And also, uh, okay, yun. And also, dapat, it required time. Kaya dapat, kapag day trader ka, minuminuto, you're online. Because every minutes, diba, nag-iiba yung price ng shares. So, kaya dapat mag-laan ka ng panahon or oras, diba, regarding this, regarding on being day traders. Okay? So, a well-developed financial market is important for economic development. In recent years, the formal capital systems have changed as governments in different countries have attempted to organize and formally recognize financial organizations in order to better generate tax revenue. Governments also now recognize that in order for companies to prosper, they must collect capital by structured methods such as selling equity in smart stock market, as this is more effective than raising funds from money lenders. So, diba, one of the best way in order for the company to raise funds, diba, is to issue shares. Diba? So, yung mga investors, bibili ng share kay company, then yung proceeds na receive doon, gagamitin nila for expansion of their business, diba? Or for their, will be used as their capital sa business nila. Okay? So, as a result, the government are giving their support in this kind of markets. Okay. Next. So the following are the important attributes of formal markets. So first, liquidity. So liquidity is a term used to describe how liquid anything is. Sabihin, they can easily convert into cash. The simplicity in which trade may be carried out is better for buyers to find a group to create a preferred deal, and the price gap between buying and selling as depends is smaller. In more competitive stocks, trading is faster and spreads are smaller. So in our formal markets, the usual transaction, diba, it must be easier. And the spreads or gap, diba, must be narrow, 'di ba, compared to dun sa mga liquid markets. Okay, next, transparency. One of the important attributes of formal markets is the transparency. So we all know that transparency is very essential. The right to provide timely and comprehensive knowledge regarding trades and rates. So kaya 'di ba every kaya ngayon regarding dun sa the fair market value ng mga shares usually nakikita na kaagad siya through online, 'di ba? And also, 'di ba, if you are um, if you have a transaction in the formal markets, 'di ba, all of the required informations, and of course, they will provide an accurate informations, 'di ba, that will affect on your decision if you're going to transact in these formal markets. Kaya dapat, ano yan, dinidisclose yung trades and prices. Next, reliability. Diba? Assuring the trades are concluded and the provisions of the agreements are followed. So in the formal markets, because it is under the monitoring of our government regulatory body, diba? May mga ano yan, requirements na dapat i-comply, 'di ba? Before the trades or transaction, 'di ba, occurred, kailangan muna yung mga legal requirements, 'di ba? Kailangan ma-provide yan. Okay? Next, legal procedures. So, appropriate at settling disputes and exiting contracts. So, if the companies or individuals are transacting or have a transaction in the formal markets, usually may mga ano yan nga, sabi ko kanina, mga requirements that are mandatory to be complied with, diba? In order for the transaction be enforced, kailangan nyo yung mga ganong compliance. Okay, next, suitable investor protection and regulation. So, confidence in the available information about securities that investors engage in the process of trading. Yan, nabanggit ko rin kanina na dapat lahat ng information na kinakailangan ng investor patungkol sa shares, kailangan mai-provide. Kasi nga, um, investor has the right to know everything about the shares. Para sa ganon, kasi yung bawat information na matatanggap ni investor patungkol dun sa shares, yan, makaka-apekto sa desisyon niya kung bibili ba, kung i-go ba niya yung transaction o hindi. Next, low transaction costs. Completing financial market transactions where trading costs, regulatory costs, and taxes are reasonable. So, if you're going to compare to other transaction, diba, kapag outside the formal market, usually because they are not regulated, diba, or there are low regulation regarding the transactions outside formal markets, usually yung mga transaction cost doon mas matataas compare sa formal market. Kasi nga, well monitored yan regulatory body o ng government. Dapat hindi ganun kataas yung mga transaction cost o yung mga fees or charges. Usually, mas favorable na makipag-transact ka sa formal market. So, market investors fail to adapt to intensified competitiveness and relentless innovation, which causes financial markets to evolve with time. So, as there's rapid changes in our technology, the financial market must always cope up with those changes. Diba? Then, and also, di ba, dahil nga sa ating teknolohiya, mas napapadali para ilapit, para mapalapit yung mga participants or market participants di ba? Para magkaroon ng transaction sa kanila. Okay? Usually, uso ng mga online platform, yan. And also, because there is increased competition, diba, yung mga financial markets, patuloy na patuloy na nag-innovate para mas mapalapit sa kanila or mapalapit sa kanila yung mga market participants. Kasi nga, mas marami yung mag-transact sa kanila, mas malaki yung kikitain mga, nung mga financial markets na yun. Okay? Next, technology. Reform the market through the abundance of computer power and cheap telecommunications that encourage growth and change the structure of financial industry. So, as what I said earlier, di ba, yung technology is a powerful tool. So, the proliferation of computing resources or computer resources and low-cost telecommunications reform the economy, encouraging growth and changing the composition of the finance sector. Okay, next, the regulatory measures or the regulation. Keeping financial markets under close regulation in order to defend consumers and maintain financial stability. Despite significant variations, most national regulators rely on the premises that individual investors need significant security, whereas institutional investor transactions need minimal oversight. So, so here, di ba, regarding sa financial markets natin, dapat, uh, dapat uh, hinihigpitan ng government yung mga uh, institution na gustong mag-undergo ng transaction sa financial markets. Uh, uh, and also the number one thing uh, that must be protected regarding sa transaction po sa financial market is yung mga individual investors. Oo, bakit? Kasi sila yung nai-invest, yung pondo nila ay binibigay nila sa financial market. Ini-invest nila yan. O, as result, dapat protektahan yung mga investment nila. Kasi once na nalugi yung company o yung financial market, di ba, malaking epekto yun sa mga investors. Next, liberalization. So it is a term that has been used to describe a general loosening of laws regulating industry access, also mirrored the removal of restrictions. So many conditions that separated various financial institutions have been lowered, allowing them to enter into each other's businesses. So rules in issuing shares of companies have been eased as well. So, di ba, in order to expand the transactions in the financial markets, some of the regulations, di ba, as is na, hindi na masyadong ganun hirap na makipag-transact, di ba, sa financial markets. As a result, mas dumarami yung mga participants. Okay? And next, consolidation. So, due to liberalization, firms merge to benefit from the economies of scale or to enter other areas of finance. So, yun nga. The same rin sa pag nag-merge na isip ni company makipag-merge. Oo. Why? Because they want to maximize their resources. Diba? If they want to expand their business, Kailangan nila ng resources. So, paano makukuha yung mga resources na yan? Yan, makikipag-merge o makikipag-consolidate, magkakaroon ng consolidation sa ibang company. And financial crisis also led to consolidation as insolvency of major banks and investment banks led to forced mergers from other financial institutions. So, in terms of globalization, most of the important financial firms are now highly international. So, regarding sa financial markets, not the local markets are transacting or they are transacting with each other. Hindi na po yan. Usually, nakikipag-transact na rin sila sa financial markets ng ibang bansa. Many companies and governments take advantage of global networks in issuing shares and bonds outside their home country. Investors take global approach of investing without worrying about geography. So here, diba, although nasa ibang bansa yung transact nila, diba, dahil sa ano natin, advanced technologies, diba, online platform natin na mas improve, madali na makipag-transact sa ibang, kahit nasa ibang bansa yung transaction. So that's the end of my discussion. So thank you.